Amelia Earhart's plane found? We're diving in on this episode of Taking Off. Hello and welcome to Taking Off. I'm Dan Milliken. Our channel is made possible by sponsors like Flying Eyes, the best glasses and sunglasses for under headsets and helmets. Go to flyingeyesoptics.com and use our discount code Taking Off, all caps, one word, for 10% off. We were customers before they even became sponsors. Links are below in the description, as well as links to our other sponsors. More about that at the end. All right, let's get to Amelia Earhart and the latest news about possible location of wreckage. But first, we'll dive into some history and background. Born in 1897, Amelia was a pioneer in aviation, becoming famous in 1928 for being the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, and then in 1932 made a nonstop solo flight across the Atlantic in a Lockheed Vega, earning the U.S.'s Distinguished Flying Cross. She became good friends with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and had lasting impact on women's rights during the 20s and 30s. Amelia married publisher-writer George Putnam in 1931. She got into aviation in her early 20s after a discovery flight at Daugherty Field in Long Beach, California. She was hooked. Over the next month, she worked various jobs to save enough money for flying lessons. Sound familiar? She purchased her first plane, a bright yellow Kenner Airster biplane, against her instructor's advice and never looked back. She set an altitude record for female pilots, getting that biplane up to 14,000 feet. She cut her hair short in the manner of other female pilots at the time. Her pilot license was the 16th ever issued to a woman by the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, license number 6017, 6000. In 1937, she attempted to be the first woman to complete a circumnavigational flight of the globe in a Lockheed Electra. The plane was provided by Purdue University, where she was on the faculty in the Aeronautical Engineering Department as a visiting professor. Planning had started the prior year, and although others had done the flight, hers would have been the longest, as she stayed as close to the equator as possible. Her Lockheed Electra was highly modified with additional fuel tanks and other equipment that they needed to make the around-the-world trip.
Throttle, 1700 RPM.
All right, so RPM's over here.
Okay.
A little while back, I got a chance to ride in, while Chrissy sat right seat, in a Electra, a 12A. It's a very similar design to what Earhart and Noonan flew almost around the world. It's a twin-engine tail dragger, and the Electra was made for passenger and cargo transport. So where I was sitting, it would have been heavily modified with fuel, radio equipment, supplies for the adventurers. She chose Captain Harry Manning as her navigator, with the plan for Earhart to fly and Manning to navigate. And during a flight across the U.S. with Earhart, her husband Putnam, and Manning, the couple were a little alarmed at some of the navigational errors on Manning's part. When they got to California, they added Fred Noonan to the crew as the second navigator, specifically for his experience over water. The plan would be for Noonan to navigate parts of the Pacific portion of the trip. Because they were going west, they were going to be hitting the Pacific right away. In March of 1937, the crew flew to Hawaii, Fort Island, and Pearl Harbor, and had some issues that needed to be addressed mechanically. And then, on the attempt to take off on the voyage, the plane ground looped, caused a gear to collapse and both propellers to strike the ground. The plane was crated and shipped back for repairs. As the plane was being repaired, Earhart decided to change the direction of the flight, and instead of heading west, decided to start from Oakland on May 20th across to Miami and then east. By this time, the crew consisted of only Earhart and Noonan, and they took off from Miami on June 1st, 1937. Over the month of June, they made their way east, South America, across the Atlantic to Africa, the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, completing 22,000 miles with only 7,000 remaining, the Pacific Ocean. They arrived at Lae, New Guinea on June 29, 1937, and on July 2nd at 10 a.m., Earhart and Noonan took off with the Electra heavily loaded for the Pacific portion with 1,100 gallons of gasoline. Their destination that day was Howland Island, a narrow, flat island only 6,500 feet long and about 25,000 miles from their departure point. And since they were crossing the international date line, the plane was to fly and land the next morning, but still be July 2nd. During the flight, Earhart reported her altitude as 10,000 feet, but we're going to reduce the altitude because of the clouds. Around 5 p.m., she reported altitude as 7,000 feet and a speed of 150 knots. The last known position report was near the Noonan Islands, about 800 miles into the flight. In preparation for the flight, the U.S. Coast Guard had sent a cutter, the Itasca, to the island to help with communication and other issues, including transporting reporters and, very importantly, provide a radio homing signal to make it easier to find Howland Island. Unfortunately, the Itasca never made the navigational radio beacon contact with the Electra. Of interesting note, the Itasca was moored at Lae, and after Earhart arrived, they did conduct some tests of the communication and navigation radio signals, and Earhart had problems with the radio navigation, but believed it was just a blown fuse, and it was consequently replaced. Motion picture taken from the press of the takeoff at Lae might have shown the navigation antenna underneath the plane torn off or damaged on the roll, but nothing was ever reported as being found on the runway. During Earhart and Noonan's approach to Howland Island, the Itasca received strong and clear voice transmission from Earhart, but she apparently was unable to hear them back. And at 6:14 a.m., the Itasca received a call stating that they were within 200 nautical miles and to turn on the ship's radio directional beacon. Around this time, the Itasca realized that their radio directional finder beacon system could not tune to the aircraft's frequency. The radio man testified later that he was, quote, sweating blood because I couldn't do a darn thing about it. Earhart called again at 6:45 a.m. requesting the beacon, as they were now only 100 miles out. Radio logs on the Itasca report Earhart telling the ship at 7:42 a.m. that she must be nearby but gas running low and flying at 1,000 feet. Her last transmission was at 8:43 a.m. We are on the line 157337. We will repeat this message on 6210 kilocycles. Wait. Then a moment later on the 3105 kilohertz channel. We're running on line north and south. Itasca oil-fired her boilers to generate the black smoke for some time. And that morning there was a scattered cloud layer in the vicinity. Searches began, as did many controversial stories of hearing radio transmission and other conspiracy-type theories. It was the Japanese or aliens. She became a POW, or she was spying for the U.S. But no proven evidence of Earhart or Noonan or their plane was ever seen until possibly now. On Sunday, January 28, 2024, the marine robotics company Deep Sea Vision, run and funded by Tony Romeo, reported what looks to be Earhart's plane at more than 16,000 feet below the surface of the ocean. By comparison, the Titanic rests at like 12,500 feet. Romeo and his brother led the expedition, and both are pilots, and their father was a pilot for Pan American, so this search was near and dear to them. The location of the sonar image is within 100 miles of Howland Island. Now, they dragged the drone for like 90 days and then sifted through the data after, so the image was found after they had completed their runs. They haven't been able to return yet to investigate that spot, and when they do, they'll work hard to identify the tail number, November Romeo 16020, and then we'll know for sure. What helped this expedition was the use of some new underwater sonar technology, specifically the Huygens 6000, which allowed for a much wider scan footprint of the sea floor and at deeper levels. And this initial path was a little higher, so the beam of the sonar is a little more spread out or distorted. When they return, they'll be able to get a much clearer sonar picture and even get a photography or video unmanned submersible down there. At that depth, the plane should actually be preserved a little better than if it was at shallower water. From the sonar images, the shadowy colors do look a lot like the distinctive shape of the Lockheed Electra, especially with the twin rudders. The size also matches as far as length and width. And finally, no other plane like that was ever been reported crashed in that area. And when you look at the image, you might say it has a swept wing look, and Earhart's plane didn't have swept wings. Romeo says that's because of the sonar distortion, and he welcomes the discussion on this. He's not saying definitively, I found her plane, but it's looking like it very well could be. Romeo's plan is to go back and confirm if it's indeed the plane, and then if possible to raise it and restore it, complete the trip to the United States that she began almost 90 years ago. And the process to do that could take years. but could also answer one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. The exact coordinates have not been released, which is no wonder, as it would lead to a huge rush on the area. Is it Earhart's plane? Well, we don't know yet, but hopefully soon. What do you think? Is it? Let the debate begin in the comments below. Okay, thanks for watching. Don't forget to visit our sponsors. All of them run by pilots like Z-Vision, makers of the brightest landing and taxi lights out there, ClemensInsurance.net. Jerry knows how to save you money because he saved me a lot. Colton Mortgage, ColtonTakingOff.com, MPS Protects, Marshall Protective Services, and 67D.com, 67 Designs, the best camera, cell phone, and tablet mounts that are out there. Remember, superior judgment trumps superior skills. We'll see you next time, but in the meantime, check out this video that Chrissy did on the John Denver crash. We'll see you later.